In April 1861, the internal order of the United States was suspended in a state of agonizing, static tension, as the gaze of a fractured nation fell upon a masonry fortress in the harbor of Charleston, South Carolina, known as Fort Sumter. Abraham Lincoln, having been in office for only 1 month, realized that this small island of stone had become the strategic alpha for the survival of the American experiment. He applied his 5-step process to the looming abyss. His goal was to maintain federal authority without firing the first shot. His problem was that Major Robert Anderson's garrison was running out of food. His diagnosis was that the Confederacy intended to use starvation as a mechanical lever to force a surrender. His design was a masterstroke of calculated risk, called the Relief Expedition, where he notified the governor of South Carolina that he would send provisions but no additional arms or men, and his execution was a psychological trap that forced the Confederate leadership to choose between passivity and aggressive persistence. On April 11, 1861, the Confederate shaper Pierre Gustave Toutant Beauregard sent a final data point to Major Anderson, demanding an immediate evacuation. When Anderson refused citing his internal order to hold the fort, the external order of the Union officially collapsed. At 4:30 a.m. on April 12, 1865, the first mortar shell of the American Civil War arched over Charleston Harbor, exploding with a systemic shock that signaled the end of the old republic. For 34 hours, the mechanical reality of the battle was a one-sided artillery duel as Confederate batteries poured over 3,000 shells into the fort, starting fires that threatened the main powder magazine. Lincoln watched from Washington as the data flow of the telegraph confirmed that the logic of the sword had replaced the logic of the law. Major Anderson, realizing his human machine could no longer function in the smoke-filled ruins, surrendered the fort on April 13th. While no soldiers were killed during the bombardment itself, the biological impact on the nation was instantaneous. The fall of Sumter acted as a kinetic catalyst that dissolved political disorder in the North and replaced it with a total concentration of force for the Union cause. Lincoln immediately issued a proclamation of war, calling for 75,000 volunteers to suppress the rebellion, effectively moving the strategy of the central position from a defensive posture to an offensive state of war. This was the turning point where the big cycle of American history moved into its most violent phase. The first battle of the Civil War proved that a divided house could not be mended by rhetoric alone. It required the fire of the forge. Lincoln had successfully maneuvered the South into firing the first shot, ensuring that the moral alpha of the conflict remained with the Union. Focus on the flash of the first mortar shell over the harbor, embrace the atmospheric weight of the smoke-filled fort, and remember that the most powerful part of any machine is the moment it transitions from rest into irreversible motion. This was the secret of April 1861, and the reason the American Union was now entering the fire to be reborn. With the smoke still clearing from the ruins of Fort Sumter in April 1861, the internal order of the United States underwent a violent systemic expansion, as Abraham Lincoln realized that the logic of the law had been permanently replaced by the logic of total war. Lincoln applied the 5-step process to the immediate abyss of a decapitated Union. His goal was the defense of Washington, D.C., which sat precariously between the secessionist data point of Virginia and the unstable internal order of Maryland. His problem was that the regular army was scattered across the frontier. His diagnosis was that the capital was a strategic vacuum that the Confederacy could fill in days. His design was the immediate suspension of habeas corpus along the rail lines, and his execution was a display of political alpha that saw him seizing the telegraph wires and railroads to rush the 6th Massachusetts Regiment to the city's defense. This was the turning point, where the strategy of the central position was used to prevent a total structural collapse of the federal government. By May 1861, The external order of the war had shifted, as 4 more states, including Virginia, joined the Confederacy, moving the biological heart of the rebellion to Richmond, only 100 miles from Lincoln's front door. Lincoln realized that the human machine of the North was screaming for a quick synthesis of the conflict, leading to the design and plan for the first major land movement toward Manassas Junction. Despite the warnings from General Winfield Scott that his raw volunteers were not yet a functioning machine, Lincoln felt the political momentum was too great to ignore. On July 21, 1861, the mechanical reality of the war hit home at the First Battle of Bull Run, where 35,000 Union soldiers collided with a Confederate force under Beauregard and Joseph Johnston. The battle began as a tactical alpha for the Union, as they pushed the Confederate flank back toward Henry House Hill, but the internal order of the rebellion held firm under Thomas Jackson, who earned the name Stonewall by acting as a human anchor for his troops. This was the abyss moment for the North, as Confederate reinforcements arrived by rail, the first time in history that mechanical transport decided a battlefield. The Union lines shattered into a state of total disorder. The great skedaddle back to Washington proved that the war would not be a 90-day event, but a generational struggle. Lincoln reacted not with despair but with radical truth, realizing that his 5-step process required a complete redesign of the military hierarchy. He removed the disorder of the defeated commanders and brought in George McClellan to turn the mob into the Army of the Potomac, a disciplined machine capable of sustained, aggressive persistence. Throughout the winter of 1861 and 62, Lincoln transformed the Northern economy into a financial alpha, leveraging the industrial engine of the North to produce the cannons, rifles, and ironclads that would eventually overwhelm the Southern machine. He realized that the big cycle of the war would be won by the side that could maintain its internal order through the longest period of systemic friction. He authorized the construction of the Monitor to counter the Confederate Virginia, proving that technical innovation was now a primary war logic. By the time the spring campaigns of 1862 were ready to launch, Lincoln had successfully moved the United States from a state of shock to a state of total mobilization. He had proven that a leader who survives an initial collapse can use that failure as a data point to build a more resilient system. Focus on the transition from the amateurism of Bull Run to the professional grind of the new army. Embrace the atmospheric tension of a capital under siege. And remember that the first battle is rarely the one that decides the big cycle. This was the secret of the early war and the reason Lincoln's grit would eventually become the mechanical engine of the Union's survival.